welcome to the first lesson of our science class, Lesson 1, Living Things in Habitats. Let's take a look at this picture. What do you see? Do you see the bright green leaves, the tall trees, and lots of plants? This is called a rainforest. What questions might you have about a rainforest? Let's think about it. You might ask, why is it called a rainforest, or what type of plants and animals live in a rainforest? These are some questions that we'll be exploring. Some new vocabulary words that we'll be learning are Arctic, forest, ocean, prairie, desert, grassland, pond, shelter, food chain, habitat, and predator. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to know the definition of each of these words. Habitats. Three friends are talking about where habitats are found. Which friend has the best idea about habitats? So one friend asks, or thinks, I think habitats are found on land. Another friend says, I think habitats are found in water. And the third friend says, I think habitats are found on land or in water. Which friend do you think has the right answer? It's Nancy, because habitats are places where animals or living things can live, and they can live on land or they can live in water. What are some things that live on land? There are camels, humans, insects, and some things that live in water could be fish or ducks. Look at this photo. You will see hills, houses, and roads. Who do you think lives in these places? And what questions do you have? We'll be exploring what a habitat is. Let's listen to this story, or this textbook, that tells us about some of the definitions that we have. Plant and animal habitats.
Plant and animal habitats. Understanding habitats. Living things survive and grow in places that give them what they need to stay alive. A habitat is the natural home where plants and animals live and grow. Deserts, forests, grasslands, ponds, and oceans are examples of habitats. Habitats provide the water, food, and space for many different types of living things. What a plant or animal needs can tell us what habitat they need. Some habitats are rainy and some are dry. Some habitats are cold while some are warm. Plants getting what they need. Plants need water and sunlight to survive and grow. In addition, plants need the right type of soil to make their own food. Different kinds of plants need different kinds of habitats. Some plants need a lot of sunlight, while others grow best with little sunlight. Some plants need a lot of water. Other plants need a dry habitat. How much rain or sunlight a habitat gets and what kind of soil it has tells what kinds of plants can grow there. A plant survives in a habitat that meets its needs. Grass and cactus grow in sandy soil. Ferns grow best in the shade. Animals getting what they need. Animals find their food and water in their habitat. Some animals eat only plants, some eat only other animals, and some eat both plants and other animals. An animal that hunts another animal is called a predator. The animals that are eaten by other animals are called prey. Animals also need shelter. Shelter is a place where animals can live and be safe. Animals use their shelter to rest, to get out of bad weather, and to hide from other animals. Animals depend on having the right kind of shelter in their habitat to survive. Some insects use plants for shelter and food. Animals use plants to build shelters. Fish and insects use rocks as shelter. Land habitats. Habitats on land can be warm and sunny, cold and snowy, or dry and sandy. A flower garden can be a habitat for insects, spiders, and snails. Forests are land habitats with many tall trees. Not all forests are the same. A rainforest grows where it is very hot and gets a lot of rain. Leaves on trees stay green all year. A woodland forest grows where it is warm, but not too hot. It gets rain some days. Some trees in a woodland forest change color in the fall. Grasslands are large open areas of land covered with grass. A grassland is a dry place with a lot of grass. The land is flat and there are very few trees. The grass can be tall. Some animals hide in the grass. Forests are habitat for trees. Birds in the rainforest find food in the trees. Water habitats. Many plants and animals cannot survive on land, but they are perfectly matched to a water habitat. Water habitats are not all the same. Some are freshwater and others are saltwater. A pond is a small body of fresh water that is surrounded by land on all sides. An ocean is a large body of salt water that is always flowing. Plants and animals can survive in either fresh or salt water, but not both. Seaweed, seagrass, and kelp grow in the ocean.
A habitat is the natural home where plants and animals live and grow. So basically, a habitat is a home. It's a home where plants and animals can live, and it can be a desert, a rainforest, the ocean. It can be anywhere where plants and animals can grow. Next, we have predator. What is a predator? A predator is an animal that hunts other animals or another animal, such as it could be a snake. A snake might hunt a mouse. It could be a hawk. A hawk could hunt a rat. So any animal that hunts another animal for food is called a predator. And the animals that are eaten by another animal are called prey. So prey is usually a little animal. Something like a worm. A worm is a prey because it's eaten by a bird. Can you think of any other preys or predators? And then we have shelter. Shelter is a place where animals can live and be safe. So here we have some examples of shelters. We have animals that use plants to build shelters, such as otters or beavers. They use wood to make little shelters for themselves, and we have birds that use plants to make nests as shelters for themselves, to protect themselves from the wind, from other animals. And fish and insects use rocks as shelter. Forests are land habitats with many tall trees. And it says that not all forests are the same. A rainforest grows where it is very hot and gets a lot of rain. Whereas a woodland forest grows where it is warm, but not too hot. And it gets rains only some days, so it doesn't rain every day. And grasslands are large open areas covered with grass. So grasslands are usually dry. So the wettest places are the rainforests. Rainforests get a lot of rain and they're hot. So you'll see different types of animals living in rainforests versus grasslands. Because some animals like and need a lot of water and some might not need so much water. Then we have ponds. A pond is a small body of fresh water, that means it's not salty, that is surrounded by land on all sides. And an ocean, which is a large body of salt water that is always flowing. So some animals will live in ponds because they like and they need fresh water that's not salted. And some animals, such as seals and dolphins and sharks, might live in oceans because they need the large amount of salt water. Before we move on, there are a couple of meanings or words that we didn't come across in the text. So I'd like to go over them with you. It's desert and Arctic. Deserts and Arctic plains are different types of habitats. A desert is very, very hot. Usually it just has sand, maybe a few rocks, caves that little animals might be able to hide in or take shelter in. But it gets very hot and the temperatures are high. It's usually near the equator, so it doesn't get much rain. And so animals here, such as camels, cacti, certain types of foxes, are used to the heat and they're able to store water, so they don't need water for a long time. The Arctic, on the other hand, which is the picture we can see on the right-hand side, has a lot of snow, and it's near the North Pole or the South Pole. It gets very, very cold, and it can even have many months where the sun doesn't come out at all. So animals here, like maybe penguins or polar bears, are used to the cold, and they don't need the sun or they don't need heat. And they have a lot of fat and a lot of fur that can save them and protect them from very cold weather. Let's see if we can use these words when explaining habitats. So a habitat has space, something, and something for the things that live there. So what does a habitat have? What are the three things that a habitat has for living things? It has space, which is where the trees and the greenery are, where the shelter is. But what other two things do they need? Food and water to survive. Now let's circle the statement if it is true, or put an X if it is false. You can pause the video and try these questions by yourself, or we can do them together. Animals use their shelter to play with their friends. False. It's not a place to play. It's a place to hide from predators that might attack them, or to take refuge or to be safe from wind or rain or stormy weather. It's their home. Some animals use plants for shelter and food. This is true. Some animals do eat plants, so it becomes their food. And they do use plants, like birds do, to build nests for their shelter. Can a plant that lives in a dry habitat live in a wet habitat? Let's think about this. Pause it for a second and think of the answer. Not usually. A plant that lives in a dry habitat is used to the dry climate, so it doesn't need so much water. So a wet habitat will not help it to survive. Like cactus. Cactus live in dry habitats like the desert. And cacti have a lot of water inside them. They hold a lot of water. So they don't need more water. Otherwise they would die. Think of the other two questions. How are the two water habitats, oceans and ponds, different from each other? Do you remember the answer? You can always go back to the video and look for the answer. And think of this one. How can plants and animals live in a cold, dry place? Well, they might use shelter. They might be built to create a type of shelter for themselves. So maybe they use wood or rocks or caves to keep themselves warm and protected from the dry, cold place that they live in. You can try this question as well. In the top row of the table, list habitats you have learned about, and in the bottom row, write something you've learned about them. So you could write desert, rainforest, grassland, ocean, for example, and say just one thing about each of those things, each of those habitats. I'm going to help you with this question because we haven't touched up on it in the text. Since the desert gets very little rain, how do plants survive there? Well, plants such as cacti, lots of cactus, these cacti live in deserts because they have the ability, or they are able to, hold a lot of water inside them. So they drink up water when it rains, or when they get any water at all, and they keep the water inside them. So even when they have lots and lots of days of hot, dry weather, they're able to use the water that they've saved and keep themselves alive. Great, and that's all for today's class. Today we're going to talk about how plants and animals depend on each other. So we're going to find out how plants and animals depend on each other and how plants and animals are connected in a food chain. Let's go through these questions. Match each word with its definition. So let's do predator first. What is a predator? If you remember, we spoke about a predator being an animal that hunts other animals, the order of how living things get the food they need, or an animal that is hunted. We said a predator is the animal that hunts other animals. So that was something like the hawk that eats the rat or hunts the rats, or a bird that hunts the worms. And then a prey, if you remember, is an animal that is hunted. So prey, usually the little ones, is the worm, because the worm is hunted by maybe larger animals like skunks or birds. Another prey example could be a little fish that is hunted by a shark or a larger fish. And then a food chain is the order of how living things get the food they need. So basically a food chain is looking at which animal hunts the other animals. So you would start small in a food chain, usually with the sun making the food for the plant. And the plant becomes food for something like a squirrel, and the squirrel is food for a fox, and the fox might be food for another larger animal. So it's the order in which things are eaten or hunted in their natural habitats. Plants need sunlight in order to grow, and eat plants in order to live. We could put an example of an animal here. What would eat plants in order to live? You could say a squirrel, because a squirrel eats the nuts from the plants, and they need that in order to live. Where do plants get the energy to grow? So we said plants need sunlight in order to grow. So plants get their energy from sunlight. We know that plants also need water, and they'll need shelter. Here are some fun activities that you can try on your own time that are about food chains. So it's about the order in which the animal is eaten. So you start small with something like a worm, which is eaten by a bird, which is eaten by maybe another bigger bird. Or in the ocean, you would say plankton, which is little plants that live in the water, eaten by small fish, eaten by maybe a shark. So you will create a food chain using different colored strips of paper to represent different plants and animals. These are some of the materials you'll need. Remember, if you're cutting anything, ask for an adult to help you. And think of how many living things will be in your food chain. So here's an example. All food chains begin with the sun. So draw the sun on a yellow strip of paper. And then on the green strips of paper, draw green plants. So we start with the sun, which makes food for the plants. And then on red, brown, and orange strips, draw different animals on your food chain. So after the plants, you could draw things like squirrels, like mice, like little birds. And then you could draw bigger birds. Maybe you could even draw bears or larger animals that would be the predator after that. And you would lay out the strips on the table in order and glue them together to make a food chain. So here you would just write it down. You would tell the order of your food chain starting with the sun. So what animals have you used? If you used sun first and then plants, put sun, plants, squirrel, bear, etc. And then think of what animals in your food chain are the prey. So which animals are the little ones that get eaten, that get hunted? And which animals in your food chain are the predators? Which animals are the large ones that attack or hunt or eat the little animals? Which are the big animals, the predators in your food chain? Let's think of this question together. Why are food chains important in a habitat? Food chains are important because they allow the circle of life to happen. If there was no sun, there would be no plants, and there would be no mice, then there would be no hawks to survive. So every little creature, every predator and prey in the food chain is important because it allows the habitat to grow and to thrive and to exist. Without food chains, there would be no habitat. Let's design a habitat for ourselves. So we just need crayons or colored pencils for this one. You will use what you have learned about habitats to create one for yourself. So we're going to make a prediction. We're going to guess. What things do you need in your habitat to survive? So what are some things that you need to grow? We all need homes. Homes are a place to stay and to live, to be sheltered from the cold or hot weather, to be sheltered from rain. So we need a home. What are some other things that you need to survive? Think about it for a second. Food. We all need food. And we need a healthy variety of food too. And of course we need water. So these are the most necessary things we need. And then here you can design a habitat that you live in and label all the things that you need to survive. So you could draw your bedroom, you could draw a bed, a light stand. You could draw some snacks, some food that you need, water, all the things that you need to survive. Lesson 2, Forest and Grassland. Forests and grasslands. 3 friends are looking at pictures of animals in their habitats. Remember, we spoke about habitats. Habitats are a place where animals and plants grow and survive. Which friend has the best idea about the kinds of animals in forests and grasslands? So Mila says, I think forests and grasslands have the same kinds of animals. Violet says, I think forests and grasslands have some of the same kinds of animals. And Seiji says, I think forests and grasslands have different kinds of animals. Well, we said forests and grasslands are similar, but they're not exactly the same. They both have lots of vegetation. They have lots of grass, they have lots of greenery, they have plants. Forests usually have taller, longer trees, and grasslands have less trees but wider spaces. Forests might have more water, grasslands might be a little hotter. So you could have some of the same kinds of plants and animals, but they're not going to be all different and they're not going to be all the same. So Violet has the best idea. Look at some living things in habitats. We're going to be talking about woodland forests, rainforests, and grasslands. So what are the difference of these three? Woodland forests have many trees. The fruits and nuts of the trees are perfect food for the animals that live there. There are also places for the animals to build shelter. There are many big animals in woodland forests, like bear, foxes, and deer. There are also smaller animals like raccoons, rabbits. Birds, insects, and worms live here too. A rainforest is hot and damp. It rains almost every day. The climate here helps many living things grow. Many kinds of plants and animals live in the rainforest. Jaguars, red-eyed tree frogs, toucan, and sloths are some of the interesting rainforest animals. And grasslands are wide areas. They are filled with low-growing plants such as grasses and wildflowers. There isn't enough rain to grow tall trees. There is enough rain that it is not a desert. So they are not as hot and not as dry as deserts. In North America, the grasslands are called prairies. Bison and prairie dogs, as well as birds and insects, live here. In the African savanna grassland, you will find zebras, elephants, and lions. So this here would be the African savanna because we find lions. This is also the African savanna because we see elephants. And this could be the prairie in North America because it has the bison. So look at this habitat with a lot of trees. What do you think might live here? And what questions do you have? So what do we see? We see some mountains in the far background, and we see some tall trees, lots and lots of tall trees. So this could be a rainforest. And what type of animals do you remember seeing here? We would see lots of birds like toucans, and maybe monkeys that could swing in the trees and live in the trees. And lots of insects might live on the bottom, especially if they like the rain and wet areas. So do we remember some of the definitions, such as forest and grassland? Forests, we said, have a lot of tall trees and a lot of rain. And grasslands have lesser trees, but they're wide and they have lots of space, open space, and lots of grass. So let's complete the table by listing animals that live in each habitat. So if you remember, rainforest would have jaguars, frogs, toucans, and sloths. And then the woodland forest, we said, had lots of raccoons, rabbits, birds, insects, worms, even bears and foxes. And then the prairie, we said, has bison and prairie dogs. And savanna would have elephants, lions, and what was the last one? Elephants, zebras, and lions. So prairies and savannas are two different types of, we went over this in the text that we had. Here we go. Prairies and savannas are both grasslands. So it's the habitat called grassland. So let's fill in the blanks with the name of the correct habitat. This habitat is hot and dry with lots of room to roam. It is a, try to remember. We could say savanna or a grassland. And what about this habitat? This habitat has lots of trees that provide fruit and nuts for its animals. It is a, it was also in the text, so you can go back here and take a look for the answer. And try this one. This habitat is hot and damp with many bright green plants. It is a, I'll let you do that one. You can try some of the activities here on your own time. Let's take a look at the last question together. Why do you think earthworms would be an important animal in a forest? We didn't go over this one in the text, so I'll help you with this one. Earthworms would be an important animal in the rainforest because not only are they food for things like birds, earthworms help to decompose or to break down the leaves that fall down, and they help to create new soil. And when earthworms do this, when they break down the leaves, the dead leaves, and they create new soil, they help new plants to grow. And when they help new plants to grow, they're helping other animals such as birds, little squirrels, find new homes to live in. So earthworms are a very important part of a forest. And that's it. See you next week.